Mr. Perriello, thank you for presenting your vision of the Commonwealth. Let's talk a little bit more about the economic anxieties that people are feeling. You spoke about transforming the educational system, raising the minimum wage. What are your thoughts on raising or lowering taxes and finding other ways to create jobs in the Commonwealth?
So thanks. I think we have to look at both the supply side and the demand side on jobs, right? We need to be making sure we're providing the most skilled workforce that is ready to both earn and be worth a living wage in the workforce. And we do that by ensuring both a quality K-12 system as well as these additions of the pre-K and 13th and 14th year. In the K-12 years, we need to move away from the SOL and SOQ focus on rote memorization. What we hear from every employer is they want project-based learning, critical thinking skills, and student-centered design that gives them the building blocks to adjust. Because in addition to the economic challenges we've already faced, there's an even bigger one that is now on the horizon. Over the next 15 years, technology and automation could disrupt from 1/3 to 1/2 of all jobs in Virginia. Now, that technology is amazing. It's changing our lives in wonderful ways, healthcare, delivery systems, etc. But it is going to be a disruption to employment that makes globalization look like child's play. So we're going to need to be moving away from the system where you get trained once and coast on that for a lifetime. And we're likely to be on a revolving door of training and opportunity throughout a career, which is why going 40,000 in debt at the beginning makes less and less sense. Now, in addition to the 2 years of community college, many people will use that for a 2+2 system to matriculate in third year to a 4-year university. We do have a student refinance program to help those that are carrying debt. Now, we also have to deal with the demand side of what we can do. And here, I think we want to keep Virginia at the forefront of innovation and technology. But we have some barriers to that. One of the biggest barriers to that is in the energy sector. That is an enormous part of our economy, where unfortunately we are still stuck in a 1950s monopoly model of energy production instead of distributed energy, which is where we're going with the future. As we look forward, it's not going to be one company, Dominion, deciding exactly what gas we're going to use, how we're going to extract it, how we're going to transport it, how we're going to deliver it, and how much we're going to pay for it. We need to move to a consumer choice model. What we're looking at today is a situation where every single farmer, small business owner, and homeowner can be part of a new energy economy. In the same way that we see many public school teachers today who will unfortunately pick up a few hours as an Uber driver or a Lyft driver because we don't pay them enough. What we're also going to see for a lot of farmers and small business owners as profit margins shrink is that getting a small piece of the energy economy will be the difference of whether or not that's enough to stay in the middle class or not. So we need to move away from this model, including these pipelines that are a $6.7 billion investment in the wrong direction. As I said to someone the other day, it's like Virginia or someone coming to you right as digital cameras are taking off and telling you to bet your pension on Eastman Kodak. It's just not where the business is going. It's not where the economy is going. We need Virginia to actually be looking at the jobs of the future, not the past.
All right, thank you. So I'm actually going to combine a couple questions just for the sake of time. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can provide affordable health care for all Virginians, but I'd also like you to include in your answer some thoughts about bipartisanship. As we know, the current governor and the General Assembly has not been able to reach an agreement on how to provide health care over the past several years. So please let me
So she talked about affordable health care and bipartisanship, how we find agreement, including some of the barriers to Medicaid expansion that we face. Great. So, as many of you know, when I was in Congress, I did have the opportunity to vote for the Affordable Care Act, and I was proud to do so. Many people think it cost me my seat, but it saved a lot of people's lives. But honestly, I was more excited about the first version of the Affordable Care Act I got to vote for, that included a public option, it included negotiation of more affordable prescription drug rates, it removed antitrust protections, and I think would have bent the cost curve over time in a more significant way. But today, families save about $3,500 a year on premiums in Virginia relative to where the cost curve would have been before. So certainly, the last thing we want to do is move backwards 10 years. And that's what this latest Trump Care or Ryan Care or No Care, whatever you want to call it, was about. It was about removing these basic steps forward. One, on guarantees of coverage if you have pre-existing conditions. Two, one of the things we negotiated hardest for at the time was the essential benefits package. And that meant that certain things like mental health coverage had to be covered. Issues like pre- and postnatal care had to be covered. Addiction services, universal contraception, and many other things that insurance companies for a long time had denied. In this case, we have made clear we would obviously veto any steps backwards because Trump, if this gets to the Senate, this will become a state issue. because they'll give states the ability to issue the waivers. We asked our likely opponent, Ed Gillespie, said that he would pursue those waivers to hand that power back to the insurance companies. We certainly would not do that and would not want to move us backwards 10 years on those protections. Now, in addition to that, we actually need to be looking at how to make the ACA stronger, not how to be moving backwards to the days where being a woman is considered a pre-existing condition in our healthcare system. Now, with the issue of Medicaid expansion, as we all know, there are 400,000 Virginians who would have coverage today if that Medicaid expansion had gone through. But they're not the only ones who got hurt by that rejection. All of you in this room who have private insurance also got the bill for it. I was going to say a word I shouldn't say here. The cost of the uninsured is immediately passed on to all of us through higher premiums. The deadweight cost of the uninsured, which means that the Republicans wanted all of us to pay more just to make sure the working poor weren't taken care of. And I haven't found a zip code yet in Virginia that thinks that's good morally or good economically. Now, what do we do about it? Well, we're going to be in a very different political environment next year in the General Assembly, and I think we're going to finally have a chance to pass this. First, I think there's a very real opportunity of a political wave this year in which the House of Delegates, despite the gerrymandering, is actually flipped in a blue direction. Now, that's going to take a perfect storm, even if it's a little bit short. Something very interesting happens next year, which is every one of those delegates who goes into the General Assembly for the first time won't know what their future constituents look like. Because they know I'm going to reject any gerrymandered maps after the next census, which means they are probably going to be able to be facing a much more neutral district in their re-election. They are, excuse the expression, behind a Rawlsian veil of ignorance of what their constituents will look like. And in that situation, certain things that have broad popularity among Virginians, like raising the minimum wage and expanding Medicaid, suddenly start to seem pretty reasonable. The last thing I will say is this. As many of you know, I'm from Charlottesville, and I represented Southside, and I've lived in Northern Virginia for the last 6 years, so I've seen a lot of different parts of the state. We've already taken over half a dozen trips into coal country on this trip and this campaign. And people say, why are you spending all this time in Trump country during a campaign? Well, I want to be the governor of all of Virginia, and I want to build credibility and also learn from people across Virginia. And I think the way we campaign says a lot about how we govern. This is something I learned as a peace negotiator in Africa and Afghanistan. People remember when you showed up and where you listened. And we're really trying to build some of that consensus. And it's not probably going to start with the legislators, it's going to start with the people. Because the people that I meet in red counties are much closer to agreement on things like Medicaid expansion than the elected officials. And if we can bridge that divide, I think we'll see significant breakthroughs that make Virginia more just and more affordable in our healthcare system.
All right, thank you. So for the sake of time, I'm going to combine two really complicated topics. I'd like to know your perspective on a woman's right to choose and how that can be protected, what the governor's role is in terms of protecting a woman's right to choose, and also how we can work in a bipartisan way to ensure that guns do not fall into the hands of the wrong people. And as you may know, we did receive some questions from the audience ahead of the program, and some people did raise the issue that you had an A rating from the NRA during the beginning of your time in Congress, and also had voted to exclude funding for reproductive choice in the Affordable Care Act during Congress. So please explain your positions now.
Sure, thank you. So on women's right to choose, I've always supported Roe v. Wade. I started marching in favor of Roe when I was in college a couple of decades ago. I've always supported pro-Roe candidates for president and supported Planned Parenthood funding when I was in Congress. In fact, I spent 3 years of my life creating organizations specifically to push back against the religious right. I founded a series of interfaith organizations because it seemed that the moral discourse in America in the public sphere was entirely dominated by one side, and frankly, entirely dominated around issues of sex and sexuality. And what we were trying to do was raise up more prophetic voices from the Abrahamic and other traditions around issues of poverty, justice, and climate stewardship. I started a group called faithfulamerica.org with some others that actually began with an ad of a rabbi, an imam, a priest, and a pastor expressing regret about the recent events in Abu Ghraib that was then broadcast into parts of the Middle East in order to try to bridge through faith discourses about issues of justice. So on the issue of choices is something where I've tried to be a defender of this for a very long time. In the Affordable Care Act, which I felt was a major step forward overall for women's health, there was an agreement that we would protect the status quo when it came to taxpayer funding for abortion in the Hyde Amendment. That was a pledge I made in my very conservative district that I would respect that, and that led me to vote for the Stupak Amendment. Though I voted against reattaching it because I'd been hoping that we would end up with a smaller compromise than what we did. The problem with that, and the reason why I've regretted that pledge, is that the status quo, quite frankly, was incredibly unjust. When we set that standard, what it means is that we will have a fundamental constitutional right on the books, but the access to that will be determined based on whether you can afford it. And here in Virginia, we have tremendous barriers to the affordability and access to that. 92% of counties in Virginia have no abortion provider. We now have laws on the books that require a woman to get a lecture and wait 24 hours. And so if you go back, as I was talking before, to the person who's making $14,000 a year on minimum wage, and you say for that person to make one of the most fundamental decisions she has a right to make, that she might have to drive across the state, she gets the lecture, she has to pay for a hotel room, lose 2 days of wages to then go in and get that the next day. We cannot separate the issues of economic justice and reproductive justice here in Virginia or elsewhere. So as governor, what will be important is first to be able to veto the kind of regressive legislation that makes it through our General Assembly as it currently exists. And I will certainly continue Governor McAuliffe's pattern of being a brick wall against those attacks on a woman's right to choose. In addition, we want to look for opportunities to be proactive. Those will be more difficult with the legislature we have, which is part of why we hope we will have a different legislature next year. But I do think that there is some small room for progress around issues like universal contraception and trying to reduce the number of unwanted or unintended pregnancies. So we will look for those opportunities to find common ground on those issues where we can. Similarly, on the issue of gun safety and gun reform, on the current dynamics, it's mostly defense. There will continue to be laws proposed that make our permissive gun laws here in Virginia even more permissive. And it will be important to continue the effort to veto that legislation that emerges. In addition to that, I think we obviously need to find common ground. To me, I find it appalling that we cannot even find common ground around universal background checks. When we pursued that after Sandy Hook, I was running a national progressive advocacy group, and we were at the center of that fight. And that was, let's face it, the most modest imaginable step to take. The White House did not decide to do assault weapons or high-capacity magazines, both of which I think there's a strong argument for pursuing. It was just, let's find the most common thing we can agree on. Because without universal background checks, the fact is you cannot know if someone with a violent criminal history is buying not just a weapon, but an arsenal of weapons. I knew one of the myths of the NRA was that there is no linkage between stricter gun laws and reduced gun safety. So because of that, we were able to raise money and do a 50-state study showing the causal link between common sense gun reform and lower gun deaths. And we were able to convert many former NRA endorsed members to support this common sense legislation. I was out in front of the Senate on the night of the filibuster at candlelight vigil reading the names of victims, and we fell a little short. But it's important to remember, if you look at how many votes we got, and you added up the populations represented by that because of the courts of the Senate, it was almost 68% of the population that was represented by the yes votes to move forward. So in the same way that the popular vote may get trumped by the electoral vote, we have to keep fighting. But we do have to remember that the vast majority of people are on the side of common sense reform, and I think it's an enormous credit to the movement organizations like Moms Demand Action and ARS in every town. They've really been able to build a significant political constituency that has changed the politics of this issue and gets us closer each year to when these sorts of things would seem like common sense and would pass.
All right, thank you. So by way of wrap up, in 1 minute, what sets you apart from the other candidates?
Oh my goodness. So when I got into this race, we said we were going to be a firewall against the hate and bigotry of the Trump administration, and there were some in the party and elsewhere who criticized that as not being a Virginia issue. And I said, you know what, that's a pretty privileged position. If you are in contact with communities of color and vulnerable communities, there's nothing more local right now than the attacks from the Trump administration. Whether that's Jeff Sessions being named Attorney General, or the second scariest nominee, Pruitt at the EPA, who is going to continue to undermine clean air and clean water regulations here in the state and protections. So what I think we have done in this campaign is we have been the clear leader in resisting that hate and bigotry and calling what it is. But I think we've also been the clear leader on what a positive agenda looks like for this era of automation and consolidation in the economy. Not only are the other candidates here not talking about that, frankly, other candidates around the country have not caught up. And I think we need a new generation of solutions and a new generation of approaches that aren't in the divisions of the 1990s. When I look at Trump country, I see a lot of common ground. I see tremendous changes in attitudes on mental health, on addiction, on criminal justice reform. I see a lot of interest in Medicaid expansion. And no, we may not agree on abortion or guns or other issues, but we can find that common ground. I think it's unusual for someone in politics to have spent more years as a peace negotiator than as a politician, but I think we could use a little peace negotiating in Richmond. I think if I've been able to bring together people who were literally killing each other for years, we've got to be able to find common ground with our neighbors across the aisle. So I believe I have the executive experience, both in building some of the largest organizations around the world and overseeing a $50 billion strategic review of federal agencies for President Obama, that we can bring that experience together. We can bridge the different parts of the state, politically, regionally, and racially, deal honestly with our past, and see a very, very bright future here in Virginia.